The Mark III, or Iron Armour, dates back to the days of the Great Crusade. Originally created as an upgrade to the existing Mark II power armour to provide increased protection on the front of the Astartes. It was intended for conflict in boarding actions or tunnel fighting, where the Astartes would be facing the enemy head-on. The armour itself never saw widespread production because of its specialised nature, but was to see widespread use amongst siege companies of the legions, and was especially prominent in legions such as the Iron Warriors and the Imperial Fists. It wasn't until the end of the Great Crusade that the introduction of the Mark IV would begin to phase out the older armours, but at the break of the heresy the Mark III would find itself in demand due to its greater resistance to bolter impacts. This tutorial is designed to help you make your own Truescale Mark II power armour. For this tutorial you will need the lists of parts that I've got here. You're also going to need some green stuff, which can come in two forms. First of all, you've got the one that's pictured here in a tube, and then second of all you've got it in strip format. It doesn't really make any difference which one you actually get. While I do recommend you getting the flat chisel clay shaper, which is shown here, you can do this with just the standard Games Workshop sculpting tool. So this is our basic Space Marine that we're going to be looking at to begin with. This is what we're going to be aiming for. This is the Mark II Cataphractii Terminator legs, and we've got the torso that we'll be constructing from the Mark II Space Marine and the Tartarus chest piece. This here is the Tartarus chest piece, and we're going to be fitting the Mark II back plate to this. As you can see here, we're going to be removing this tab, and we're going to be trying to keep it as flush as possible so that the back will fit on. So I'm just going to clip these off. And as you can see here, I've got it fairly flush. I mean, I'm working through this quite quickly, so I'm not going to be too neat with this. It's just to give you an idea of what to go for. And I'll just trim off the other side. And there we can see it's fairly flush. It's good enough for what we need it for at this stage. But you can use like carbon paper to file that down, or trim it more with your knife. So next I'm going to take the Mark II rear torso, and I'm going to be attaching this to the front. And this will be providing us with a framework that we can sculpt over. So I'm just going to trim these last bits off. And then we're going to apply the glue on as many contact points as possible. I'm going to do a dry fit before I start. And as you can see, that I'm lining up the front of the torso with the back so that it creates a flush edge along the top. I'm going to put glue on every possible contact point, mainly because I want to create as much grip so that this will hold together. And there we go. Oh. And we're lined up quite nicely with the top. It's a little rough, but like I say, you can take your time with this and file down where you need to. But that's our basic torso piece. And here you can see it compared to how we're going to fit it to the legs. This is quite a simple process, but we're basically creating a framework for us to do the GS work over it. So what I've done with the legs is I've glued them to the base, and I've stuck a bit of sprue on top. Now this is going to create a column that we can glue the torso to. I've also shaved a little bit off the top there to flatten it out to make the contact a bit better, and I'm going to be cutting roughly about there. It's better to trim not enough than too much in a case like this. And then what I can do, if I wanted to, I could use carbon paper or a knife and flatten that out. As you can see here, it's leaning back a little bit, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to line up the inner edge of the torso with the top of the cables. So what we've got here is this lip, and what we want is that to sit just above the cables on the abdomen. So just along here. Now these are the main contact points along here and along here. So this is where I'm going to be applying the glue. And again, I'm just putting it on as many different areas as I can to try and create some sort of bond to hold it in place. Now I'm going to take the legs and attach the torso to the sprue. I'll be pushing it back a bit so that the lip actually makes contact with the tubes on the abdomen. So as you can see, this is leaning back a little bit, but as it's a bit of a rush job, it's not something that I can't go back into sort of fix later. I'll try and lean it forwards a little bit so you can see. Now this is a completed one that's set and ready to go. We're now going to be applying the green stuff. This is the main area that we're going to be focusing on first, because we're going to be doing this in layers. Now I'm going to be doing this in one go, but it's probably best to let each layer set. It takes about 45 minutes, but if you production line them, so you've got more than one on the go, you can just flip between each marine on each stage, and by the time you get back to the first one, it should be drier. Now this is the green stuff, so it comes in the green, in the blue and the yellow. I've got equal amounts, and I'm just going to mash that together. Now the idea is we need a consistent green colour, so we want to get rid of any veins that we see of yellow or blue. We just want a solid green colour. Now the more yellow that you add, the stickier and tackier it will become. Our green stuff is a memory material, so you've got about 20 minutes or so of use before it'll try and start to set. Once it does set, any sort of like manipulation at that point, it's going to try and form back to its original shape. So you've got about 20-25 minutes to sort of like playing around with it. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to tear off a blob or a sausage of the green stuff. Now this is the chisel tool. These are, you can pick these up online for a couple of quid. They're not very expensive, but they will make a world of difference when comparing it to the metal tool because of the flexible tip. You, as you can see, this is your standard sort of Games Workshop style tip, which is good for pressing green stuff in place, but isn't great for sculpting. So I'm going to tear a bit off. And then I'm going to place that in the gap on the back. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the tip of the chiseled ever so slightly, just so it's got a glisten to it. And then I'm going to start pushing down and dragging and rubbing across the surface. I'm pulling away. And as you can see, I'm dragging the green stuff around. But the more important part is I'm getting a clean, smooth surface. Here you can see I'm pushing it a bit. Don't be afraid to cut away parts with knives. You can always clean that up with the sculpting tool afterwards, as I'm doing here. So I'm pausing to wet the tip, so it's just a glisten of water on the end. You can use Vaseline if you want, but you don't want loads. And I'm just gently dragging it around and pushing. Here, when I'm trying to work it into the side, I'm pushing a little bit harder. But there, as you can see, I've filled most of the gap. Obviously, you want to take your time a bit more than I am here, and you can probably fill that a lot more even. But now I'm going to add the first lip. Like I say, you want to do this after the first one's dried, really. But for time purposes, I'm just ploughing on with this. So I'm doing exactly the same as I was before. So I'm pushing down and pulling along the surface. I'm pressing to smooth the surface out and working it into the general sort of like areas. The key part that I'm aiming for here is I want to create a layered look that mimics the rear of the Mark III armour. I mean, obviously you can go further than this, you can add individual rivets, but for purposes of this tutorial I just want to keep it simple. So I'm just going to push that around a bit. And now I'm going under the lip, and basically what I'm doing is I'm just flattening the edge. So I want to create sort of like a hard edge on there. And then I'm immediately going to the flat and I'm dragging it up ever so lightly, just brushing it like if you were painting really with a brush. So I'm just cleaning up that edge to try and give us a hard edge so that it looks more like the lip of the torso. And again, I'm just cutting this, trimming this down, and then I'll just tidy it up a little bit with the knife, with the clay shaper. And there we go, there's our first lip of the power armor, the first layer. I'll just tidy up underneath a little bit. As I'm working on this, as I am sort of speeding my way through it, it's going to get bashed a little bit, so you'll see me tidy up little bits here and there, but the end result isn't overly important. So for the third and final level, I'm mixing up the green stuff again, so 2 equal sizes mixed together, make sure there's no veins in it, so it's all one solid colour. And then I'm going to tear 2 smaller pieces off. And now what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be creating like the shoulder parts to create the third layer on the back. Obviously I'm trying to avoid going over the connector for the backpack because we can use that later on to just use plastic glue to glue the backpack to the torso. So I'm putting a little blob on the side, so unlike before where I was doing like a sausage along the across the back, I'm just adding 2 little blobs. And then I'm just going to press them in, and I'm going to run it along the edge, pushing down a little bit so that we can create another lip. This is a little bit messy, but it'll get the idea across to you. See, as you can see there, we've now got that layered effect, which is one of the main parts of the look of the iron armour. You can see from the back of the legs a similar sort of effect. That's like the original Mark II armour plates showing through. So I'm just going to push this bit on. And again, all I'm doing is I'm pushing down to form the rough shape. So I'm pressing, and then I'm just brushing along the surface lightly to sort of like smoothen it out. And you just play around with it a bit. But again, make sure that you've got some water, or like I say, you can use very small amounts of Vaseline on the clay shaper. All this you can do with the Games Workshop sculpting tool, so don't feel that you have to buy a clay shaper, but a clay shaper will make your life so much easier and you'll get a much nicer effect. So I'm just brushing down now to try and blend in that top plastic plate a bit. And just sort of like squash it in a bit. I'm trying to keep the arms plastic where the arm side parts are still exposed, because I want to glue the arms on later on using polystyrene cement. And there we go, it's starting to shape up. It's not bad looking, but it gets the idea of where you're supposed to be going with this. Now for the neck part, I've made a ball of green stuff, and first of all I'm going to place some in the neck. Now I don't want to fill this entire cavity all the way up. I want to create a bit of a lip around the edge. Don't be afraid to add more afterwards if you've got a situation where you're not going deep enough, or don't be afraid to remove it and try again if you've gone too high. So you want to just sort of like put the ball in like that, and then using the tool you're just pushing down and you're pushing out, so you want to push up against the edge. So you're brushing it out. You don't have to worry too much about this stage. This is to create the neck joint. For the most part it's not actually going to be visible on the model because the helmet's going to be in the way. On some models I've actually created a lip, an inner lip, to give the impression it's something that I might use for, say, like a bare-headed marine, to make it look like it's more like a suit of armour. But for helmeted marines it's really not important. So as you can see, I'm pushing out to the edge, and then I'm pushing down along the edge as well. I haven't quite put enough in here, so I'm going to have to top up the edges a little bit, I think. There we go. Again, pushing down, and it's almost like a rubbing motion, sort of a circular in some respects. But you're going right up to the edge of the collar, and then that will create a nice little lip. See, this is where you want to make sure that the rest of it's dry, really, because you'll knock it if you're not careful. So I'm just brushing it around a bit. That's pretty much it, really. That'll do. And then once I've got the Space Marine helmet, I can just plonk it in there. I'll add a little bit more just to neaten it up, but it's not incredibly vital. It's more to do with getting the head set at the right height. But that slight shine that you can see on it, that's just the water. That will evaporate. So when it actually comes to painting, you'll be able to go over that straight away. You won't have to prepare it in any way. So I'm going to take my helmet, and I want to line it up roughly so that the center of the head is where roughly about a little bit towards the back, so that it's lines up between the hips, so in a straight line. Mainly because if it'll look odd if you go too far forwards. Luckily the collar in this is quite limiting, so it does most of the work for you. But once that's dry, once that helmet's actually dry in place later on, you can twist the head off, put in some super glue, and then glue the helmet back in if you want, into the green stuff hole that you've made, if you want a stronger bond. I mean, it will stay in place, but green stuff isn't the greatest bonding agent in the world when it comes to gluing parts together. But like I say, I'll be knocking this guy around quite a bit, so I will stop every now and then to sort of tidy it up. But there you can see the difference between what we had before and what we had now, and you can see that it's starting to take form. It's already beginning to look more Astartes like. So next we want to create the belt. You can just put the cataphracti belt straight on and have the tassels hanging down. That looks fine, especially for legions like the Ultramarines or the Emperor's Children. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be trimming it, and we're going to be using the bottom plate from the Mark III armor. So I'm just trimming down the edges. So I'm removing the remnants of that of the straps, which is quite fiddly, but again, I am being quite careful with the knife here. So I'll put a little bit of glue in. And now the fiddly bit. I'm going to put the buckle in place. I'm using the point of the knife to work it into the recess properly, so we get a nice flat finish. And there we go, that's the belt buckle in place. Now we're going to take the Mark III torso front, and we're going to, this is a little bit awkward because I'm having to cut it like this because of the camera, but I'm going to cut the front of the plate off and just trim it so it's flush with the belt. This isn't going to come out 100% straight, so you can obviously you can take your time and cut it against a flat surface. But that's basically the bit that we're trimming. We're removing that plate, and as you can see there, it's flush with the belt. A little bit wonky, but not to worry. So I'm just going to add a bit of glue. Now I'm adding glue across the top to connect to the belt, and the back to connect to the cod piece. Now as I've cut this at a little angle, I'm going to push it around a bit, see if I can line it up a little bit so it's a little bit straighter. There is a slight little gap in there. I mean, I can always go back and fill that with green stuff. And again, this is where letting them dry first helps, because I'm still knocking little parts of the green stuff. So I'll just tidy that up a second. Not that it's massively important for this model, because it's just show you guys how it works. So next we're going to do the arms. So for this one I'm going to be using the set of arms. There's two sort of slight variants. You've got one where the elbow's tucked in a little bit tighter. You can use both of them, but for this case there's one that's where the elbow's out slightly a bit, so it gives the arms a slightly better range of motion. So I'll just trim off a bit of the sprue. Again, I'm only doing this quickly. And then just get rid of that bit. And then I want to take my Phobos pattern bolt gun, which comes with the Mark III Marines. Just trim that down a bit. Get rid of the sprue. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue that onto the wrists first. Now the idea behind this is because the front armour bulges out slightly, and this isn't designed to fit this model, this is a custom model that we've made, it will allow us to play around a bit with the positioning of the arms. So first of all I'm going to do a dry fit. Now there will be a tiny little gap, but I'm not too fussed about that because the shoulder pad's going to cover that up. The more important part is the bulge of the torso, where it bulges out at the halfway point. You can, if you wanted to, trim the torso a little bit, but along this part here, you could remove a section out, just trim it down slightly to create a snugger fit, because you're not going to see behind the arm anyway. And so what I'm doing is I'm putting glue along the forearm as well as the entire length of the inner arm, because I want to create as much contact as possible to hold it in place. You could shave down the shoulder a little bit or add a bit of plastic under there, but it will work just gluing it on it as it is. So again, just trim that down a bit of the sprue. And then we'll put the glue on the shoulder, and then we'll put the glue on the hand. That's so that we can attach it to the bolter, so that gives us an extra bit of contact and a bit more strength. Now obviously I'm rushing this, so you want to take your time a bit more, but there he goes. A little bit messy, but straighten the head up a bit. So there we go. It's roughly in place. I mean, at this point it's fixed. The polystyrene cements will glue it together, but the main strength's coming from the right arm, because you've got that contact along the inner arm with the torso. The gaps might be visible on the shoulders, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill them in with green stuff. It doesn't have to be massively, but the main problem is once you pick the Marine up, if there is a visible gap that can be seen under the shoulder pad, you're going to see daylight through the arm bit. And ideally you want it to be closed off, because otherwise it just looks weird. It's just a pet peeve really. It's nothing you have to really worry about, but if you're going to be putting in all this time, energy and money into creating these, you want to go the extra mile really, if you've come this far. So I'm just putting the blob on there, and I'm just pushing that into the gap, smoothing the surface out. And pushing directly straight down into the gap to create that edge and fill the gap. And we're just doing as we were before on the back, where I'm just sort of gently pushing it around, remembering to apply a little bit of force as I'm dragging it away or pushing it towards the edge. I'll alter the shoulder height a little bit. At this point I'm being careful to leave some of the plastic bare. Just tuck in that bit at the back. Again, like I say, you might not have to do this, but it is very distracting when you pick the guy up and light shines through the arm piece. So I'll just push that in a little bit, then just work the surface a bit. Again, leaving some of the plastic exposed on the top so I can connect the shoulder pad without having to use super glue. Oh, there we go. Again, I'm rushing this a little bit, but you can take your time and really sort of like work it around. Once you've made a few of these guys and you get into the swing of it, it's not that difficult. But there we go. So just do the other side. Again, I'm trying to put the shoulder on now, so that I've used regular polystyrene cement. If I was to go over the whole shoulder with green stuff, you could use super glue, but polystyrene cement actually welds the plastics together, so you get a better fix. There we go, and there's the other shoulder, and that's not looking too shabby, but you can see how he looks like a Mark III Marine now that he's actually started to take shape. And that's the bulk of it done. From this point on, it's just like assembling a regular Marine. So we're just going to take the backpack next. As you can see where we've left that clear, we're just going to glue the backpack straight on, just like you would when you're assembling a regular Marine. So that's done a lot of the work for us. And there we go. And there we have our Truescale Mark III Space Marine. It's a couple of humans shown in for a rough sort of scale. I mean, if you imagine these guys are probably about 5'11", so that's 6 foot. the gate on the legs, they're actually quite spread apart. So realistically, I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but they are roughly about the right size to go with this guy. I mean, the head's coming up to the chin if they were to stand up straight. Space Marines, I think it's arguably about 7.5 foot in height. So they're a good head taller than the Guardsman. And then this is one of my word bearers, pre-heresy, that I'm working on. Just to show you what it looks like with a bit of paint on. See, as you can see, it all looks as if it's one model. I've added the ammo clips and the bolt pistol, and you can see where the collar part and the helmet's covering most of that. And there we have it. That's our Mark III Space Marine. Thanks very much for listening. If you've got any questions, leave it in the comments section below, and I'll see what I can do to help. I'll try at some point with the Tartarus front torso. Basically, what you're talking about when you're collecting the parts for these. What I was doing was I was sourcing a lot of the parts off eBay. You've got like the Battle for Calth and the Prospero box sets. Basically, they were being sold off cheap by various people as individual sprues, sort of like complete squads. In total, it was working out to about £8 or £9. If you sort of like count in the Tartarus torso front, they're a little trickier to get hold of, but you can use the Cataphracti torso fronts if you can't get hold of the Tartarus ones. It'll probably work out a little bit cheaper for you, but realistically you have to be like a hardcore modeler if you want to create an entire army of these guys. But they are great for stuff like kill teams if you want to show off to your mates and sort of like turn a few heads. But they will be fire magnets. I've not actually used them since the Primaris Marines came out, but it's always been a case of the size of them, psychologically for some people can be quite intimidating. So they do tend to attract a lot of fire. Personally speaking, what I'm intending to do is word bearers Great Crusade era. So they'll be set. What I'm doing is the Graven Star Company, which is set before Calth, but not long after that they've met up with, been reunited with Lorgar again. So that's what I'm going to be getting on with. Maybe I'll do some more videos on that, but in the meantime, thanks very much, and I'll speak to you later.